Hi, it's Juliet. Welcome back to my studio. Today I'm going to show you how to make these dragonfly beads. They're made using a lentil press, and it looks like they're flying over a field of flowers. The flowers are frit applied on the back side of the bead, so there's a lot of depth of glass. And then they're applied to the top. Let's get started. In terms of tools, we're going to be pulling some twisties, and I like to use these cane twisty pullers that have these discs on the end. It makes it really easy. I will also be using some fine point tweezers, something to press down the wings on the dragonfly. So I like my little dental press, but you can also use something like Corina's magic wand or any kind of a tool, a stump shaper, any kind of a tool for just pressing things down. We will also be using a lentil press. This is the medium plus size from Zooziis Lentil, but any kind of lentil or round press, you could probably even squish a flat tab. The other supply you need is some Frit. I'm using a multicolored Frit from Valcox Frits called Fleeting Beauty. Any color combination, and you need something to dispense it in. I just got these little Frit dispensers from Corina Beads, which are kind of cute. They've got these little notches, which makes it easy to get your mandrel down into the Frit trough. So I kind of like those. But you can also use something like an au jus bowl or anything to get your Frit onto the bead. So the glass I'm using today will be a clear. I like super clear 006. I will have two shades of blue, a dark blue, which is number 240, a lighter blue, which is 222. I'm also going to use a bright yellow. This is Lausha number 341. A transparent striking yellow, which is 910, and we'll need a little bit of intense black stringer. One of the components for the dragonfly is to use a twisty for the wings, and you can use any one of a variety of colors. Here's a sampling of some. Today I'm going to demonstrate using a blue and gold pulled twisty. You probably also want some straight pulled stringer, just a solid color for the body of the dragonfly in a coordinating color. So I have a number of blues here, and sometimes I like to layer two different colors to give it a little extra depth. You're going to want some clear stringer to give extra depth on top of the bead. You could also use a transparent stringer, so if you went with like the transparent striking or yellow, that would give it a lot of more color intensity as well. And you're going to want a small stringer pulled from intense black for the pupils in the eyes. Okay, I'm going to start out by demonstrating how to make the twisty that we're going to use. So let's fire up the torch. Make sure you're safe and you put your lighter away in a place where it can't get hit by flying hot glass. Okay, so for this I'm going to make a base of yellow and then build up some blue stripes on top of that. So I'm using a bright yellow. I happen to have grabbed a rod of Lausha. It's a nice stiff glass, and sometimes it's easier to use a stiff glass as the core when you're making a twisty. So I'm heating up the end of the disc, and I want to get it red hot. That way the glass will stick well. And the disc has a certain diameter, and I want to have the glass almost fill it, but not go completely to the edges. I want to leave a little bit of a gap there. So I'm heating the yellow glass, kind of twisting it and applying it sort of in a circle to make a somewhat even cylinder. And of course, the amount of glass you put on will dictate how long of a twisty you can get out of it. After I get it hot and wound on a bit, I can use my marvering pad to even it out, make it a cylinder, and tap down the end. So I'm trying to get it nice and round and uniform. Now when I'm using my marver, I am at the edge so that the disc is just past the edge of my marver, because remember the glass doesn't go quite all the way to the tip. Okay, so that's pretty good. It's probably maybe ½ an inch long. So now I'm going to take one of the blue colors and I'm going to apply some stripes. So I'm going to decide where it's going to, what edge it's going to go down. And I'm looking for an edge that's got a little bit more of a gap to that middle disc. I'm heating it up and I'm going to get the disc hot, and I'm going to start the blue right on the disc. That way it will stay anchored. I'm going to touch it down on there and go along the length. Just bring it to the center and flame cut it off. And I'm going to put another stripe on the opposite side. Those extra little bits of blue that hang over the edge, I want to heat those up and flatten them against the disc. That will help them to stay anchored while I'm doing my twisting and my pulling. Do a little bit of marvering, perhaps tamp it down to widen out the end and restore my shape a little bit. Now, when you're marvering, you want to be careful that if it's hot, that you're not twisting it. You can see I actually got that a little twisted in my last marver. So this time I'm going to go in the opposite direction and straighten it back out. This helps it to keep it a little bit more uniform before the pull. Okay, so now I'm ready to attach the other side. It's a pretty simple twisty with just 2 colors, but you could go to town and add more colors or what have you. So I want to have the tool in my right hand hot. I want to get the end of the disc hot, and then I want to get the tip of that also hot, and then I'm going to just meld them together. And the tip of the glass is hot, and you want to try to get it as centered as you can. I've got that adhered, and I'm changing to an overhand grip. So now I was just concentrating heat on the right hand, so I'm going to add a little bit more heat to the left. And then I'm going to go back and forth. And the nice thing about these discs is you can judge them by the color, the red hot, and see how much heat is in there. And it makes it pretty efficient to pull the twisties without much waste or dog bones on the end. So now at this point I can kind of push and pull a little bit and see that my glass is pulling uniformly. And I can see there's a section on the right where it's not pulling very much, so I probably need to get a little bit more heat in there. So now I've got both discs hot, and I think it's heated uniformly. So I'm going to take it out of the flame. I'm holding it below the flame. Just let it chill a little bit, and now I'm going to start twisting them in opposite directions. I'm not going to pull much, but I'm going to put a lot of twists. I want this very heavily twisted. Now what I'm doing is I'm dipping back into the flame, but I'm dipping just past the edge of those discs. I'm trying to keep the disc hot, and that keeps the glass hot, and that helps give me a little bit better control and less waste. So I can go back and forth. My flame is just beyond the edge of the disc. Back on this side, a little bit more. You can see how far I can actually pull and get a lot of the glass off of that disc. So there's very little waste. Okay, so now we're going to start the bead. So I am going to take my mandrel, and I'm using a thin mandrel that is sized for my press. One of the things I like to do is sort of finger sand my bead release and blow the extra off before I heat it up and make my bead. I find that that makes the mandrel hole smoother, and it's easier to get the bead off, and optically it is got less divots in it that you need to smooth out, and I just think it looks better, especially since this bead we're going to be looking through it, to the other side, so you want to have a nice bead hole. So now I'm taking my clear, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm using 006 Super Clear, and I want to put a footprint down on the mandrel. I preheated the mandrel so it doesn't bubble. I check my footprint against the size of the cavity for my lentil press, and that's about the right width. And so now I'm going to build up the glass a bit. So we're going to be making the lentil and then adding some frit to it. So we don't want to overfill the cavity, but you can have it just about the right amount, maybe a tiny little bit underneath. It depends on how much frit you're planning to add to it. I like to put a good amount of frit so it looks rich in color. So for a lentil press, the shape that you want to build up in your mandrel is a football shape. So we established the length of it, and now we're going to build up the glass. The exact shape and how much volume of glass you need really comes from experience. I need to add a little bit more. This wasn't quite enough for the cavity. If you've got a new press, you could take, polymer clay or something like that and figure out how much you need to fill the cavity and then shape it on your mandrel and have an idea of how much it takes. And then I'll give it a light half press. And when I say half press, at this point, I'm not going to actually put the top on. I'm just going to put it down in the cavity and push it down to get it to more or less fill. I haven't picked up the frit yet, so I don't want to actually press it. Every time you press it, you run the risk of knocking off some bead release, and I don't want to do that. So I just gently pressed it from one side and then on the other side to get the rough shape. And now at this point, I'm going to heat one side really well. And you'll notice I'm turning it so that the torch is hitting it normal or perpendicular to the surface. I'll let that soak in a minute. What I'm going to do here in my trough is make a pile in the middle. So it's got like a little mountain range going down the middle. And that is going to make it easier to pick up the glass. All right, so it's hot on one side, and I'm going to touch it down, kind of nestle it in, rock it back and forth, right and left. And this is where those little openings in this bead trough come in handy. It lets you rock it and completely cover the one side of the lentil. So you can see it's got the frit completely covering it. So I used quite a bit of frit on it to completely cover it. And now I'm going to let that frit melt in and spread out a little bit. And at this point is when I'm going to go back into my press and press it for real with the top and get my nice lentil shape and smooth it all out. At this point, if you didn't pick up enough frit, you could get a little bit more. I think I have an okay amount here. I don't want it to be completely dense, but there aren't really any gaps. Now I'm going to go into my press, put it in there, and press it with the lid. You get a nice crisp lentil shape. And I'm going to come out of it, and I'm going to heat up the side that has the frit. And now what I'm going to do next is add some twists into the frit. I have a stringer that I pulled in clear. You could use any kind of a coordinating color if you wanted. And I'm going to heat up a section of it, and I'm going to touch this down and just make a little twist, and then I'm going to flame cut it off. Now, depending on the size of the twists, if you go in with a small stringer and heat a small area, you'll get a small twist. If you want a bigger area, you can take your your stringer, you can kind of just flatten the end so you have like this little flat landing pad, and that will be able to draw glass from a bigger area. And now when I'm heating the glass, I'm heating a slightly larger area. So when I twist it, it will draw glass from a wider area and make a bigger spiral twist. So it depends on what kind of look you're going for. I'm going to have a little bit of big ones and a couple of small ones. I just want to add some interest on the back side of the bead here so it looks nice and finished. And at this point, if you've distorted it a little bit with the twisting, sometimes, especially near the edges, if you get it a little bit too hot, you can go back in and press it again. Because the next step is to decorate it and add the dragonfly. Okay, so now we're ready to make the dragonfly. So I'm going to use one of the twisties that I pulled earlier for the dragonfly. So the idea here is to have two sets of wings. And I'm going to apply one wing from the center going above the mandrel on both sides, like that and that. And then on the other side, below the mandrel, I'm going to go from the center to the edge. You can look at pictures of dragonflies, and kind of judge what wing is larger or smaller and the shape of them. Or you can, just make them look like fantasy critters, flying bugs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this stringer here, which is a bit thicker on this end. And I'm going to do the two wings that are above the mandrel. So I'm going to heat up the end of my stringer, or my twisty. I'm going to touch it down, and I'm going to lay it down. I'm not going to pull it out. And if anything, I want to add a little bit more twist because I like the really tight twist. It looks like vertical stripes on the wings. So I'm adding the upper wing going out to the edge, and then I'm going to pull it out and flame cut it. Now, depending on the location, before you melt it all in, you can kind of scooch it a little bit And you can flatten it to one side or the other to get its position more to your liking. And I'm going to use my tool here to flatten it out and give it some width, especially in the middle. If you look at pictures of dragonfly wings, they're sort of like crescent shapes on the edges. They're wider in the middle and a little pointier around the ends. So you can kind of play with that a bit. Now I'm going to add another one to the other side. So I'm going to get my twisty hat and get my bead hat where he's going to land. And I'm going to put that one down on the other side. And I'm kind of working upside down in the flame, so you may not see that as well, but that's sort of the angle I need to get the heat without burning myself. When you're going to the left with the twisty, if you're right-handed, it's much more difficult. And I didn't want to go from the outside in because I'm starting with the twisty fatter and I want to make it thinner as I pull out. That's why I was starting in the middle and going out where it's... So I'm going to use this other twisty, which is a little bit thinner on the end for the lower part. And I'm going to, this part here, the angles are easier. So I'm going to start here, get my bead hat, get my twisty hat, and put down the wing on the lower side, flame cut it. And now I'm going to work on flattening it. Every so now and then, put a little bit of heat in the backside. Now at this point, we're going to be adding a body, and I don't want to have to go over this big mountain of glass in the middle. So what I'm going to do is take my tool and just kind of push down a little trough or a groove in there that I can lay down my body stringer through. At this point, you may also want to kind of tuck in that section, the join between the two wings, to keep them separate so it doesn't become a big blob. And I'm going to use a darker blue stringer, and I'm going to start where the head is and just go straight down to the body. So I'm going to start at the head, straight down to the body, and then pull it off and flame cut it. And when you start at the head, you know, it naturally leaves a little bit of a ball there, but that's going to become the head. I'm going to put another one on top of it because I want it a little bit fatter than that. There we go. I'm going to heat it. I'm going to flatten the head a little bit, and that'll give it a bit of width. If you want to have a pointier tail, you can heat up that end. You can touch your stringer to it and just pull it out to a very fine point if you like. You can also make the head a little bit bigger by adding a little bit more glass. And then you can also shape the nose of the dragonfly by pulling that out a little bit as well. So if I wanted to take my stringer and just kind of pull that out a little bit, I can adjust the shape of the nose. If you want it wider, you can also add 2 dots on either side to kind of give a good landing spot for his eyeballs. So that's sort of his head. And you can see his head is sort of a triangular shape now, or like an upside down heart. Okay, so I'm going to next add 2 yellow dots for his eyes, one on top, on the outer edge of both sides. And I want to put a couple of dots down the center of his back, just in the section between his wings. Just to add a little bit of detail. Okay, and that's just a stringer pulled from the same yellow I used in my twisty, so you can kind of go to town with the color coordination. Melt those in a little bit. Okay, so next I want to add a little bit of depth to the wings. So I'm going to put some clear on top of them. And that will, it basically optically enlarge it and make the details show off a little bit better. So I'm going to use my full width glass rod here. You could use a stringer as well. And I'm going to start in the center, just outside of the body, and swipe outwards towards the tip of each wing. So I've got a little bit of a gather. I'm going to just touch down and swipe out, and then flame cut it. I like using the fatter rod because you get a larger volume of glass, so you get better coverage. So now I'm going to go in and just kind of push down, melt the glass around the tips, flatten it out a little bit, make sure it's lined up over the twisty well. Sometimes you'll see some bits sticking out on the bottom side. Almost looks like a turtle from this side. If you want to, you can heat those out and use your fine tweezers and pull those wings out and then flame cut it off. You can do that to all 4 of the wing tips. There we go. Making it from the bottom side, make sure those little flame cut things are all melted in, they're not sharp. Especially if you're doing this for beads of courage, you want to make sure that things are well adhered and there are no sharp bits. You also don't want to use any metallic frits or reduction frits that have heavy metals in them that turn into, you know, golds or silver. This kind of style probably would look really cool if you use Twisty with some of the silver glasses for the wings. Okay, so now I am going to add 2 black dots for pupils to the eyes. Melt those in a bit, and then I'm going to just do a final press on the wings to get the width of them a little bit better matched. I'm going to press down the ones that I think need to be widened a little bit, so heat it and press it down. All right, so there we go. We have a dragonfly bead. You can get a bit of insurance.
Look how awesome these adorable little dragonfly beads came out. I am really excited. They're so fun and happy for the spring season. And there's so many different color palettes and options that you can do with these. Really just let your imagination run wild. As always, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, and you can check out the rest of our tutorials on the playlist that is listed above.